Sam is the PFF lead NFL analyst and the co-host of the PFF NFL show. Sam, thanks for joining us.
Anytime, guys. How's it going?
Doing great. So everyone needs to go check out PFF's mock draft simulator over at pff.com/mock to get in on that. You can become your own GM and build the Broncos draft. And speaking of mock drafts, Sam, you had a mock earlier this week where you didn't have the Broncos picking at 12. You had the Broncos moving up into the top 3 to select Jayden Daniels. Sam, why did you have that move, and what would that cost the Broncos to make such a big jump?
Well, it would cost a lot. Everybody's talking about the Minnesota Vikings, as the team that's going to get aggressive and going to make that trade and jump up into the top 3 or 4 picks to get their quarterback. But I feel like Denver is every bit as desperate as Minnesota, if not more, albeit with less ammunition to work with. They don't have the 2 first-round picks already the way Minnesota does. But, the Russell Wilson saga. I mean, Sean Payton ran that guy out of Denver. They've eaten the biggest dead cap hit of all time to make it happen. He has staked his reputation on the idea that it could not work with Russell Wilson, and we're going to need to go in a different direction. Well, we need the different direction now. We need the answer. And the obvious way of doing that is to go and get aggressive and go and trade up for that guy. Now, yeah, it would take some creativity in terms of a trade to make happen. The price was set, by the 49ers a few years ago with that Trey Lance deal. That effectively cost them 3 first-round draft picks to make that deal. Denver doesn't have the exact, the same terms to be able to make that happen, but I think they could craft a trade to cross that number of picks and get all the way up to number 3 and get their guy, and that would provide the answer. That would give you the quarterback.
Do you think that Jayden is the best fit for Sean Payton? Obviously, taking like Caleb Williams out of the mix.
I think he's a nice fit. I think it's difficult to know exactly what the perfect fit for a Sean Payton offense is. We've seen him run it with a variety of different stylistic quarterbacks and have success with pretty much all of them. I think he's demonstrated the ability to be an adaptable quarterback coach, an adaptable offensive coach to shift what he wants to do to suit the strengths of his guy. So I don't think they necessarily need to find the next Drew Brees, find a guy that's just incredibly accurate, that takes what's there and works the horizontal passing patterns. Aside from anything else, I think the game has changed since Drew Brees was playing. I also think the offense changed, even with Drew Brees as quarterback. If you go back to the days of, Devery Henderson and those guys, they had a vertical, aggressive attacking offense with Drew Brees at the helm. He didn't amass, however many career receiving or passing yards that he did by dinking and dunking it down the field the whole way. So I think Jayden Daniels has got the arm. He's got the kind of the selection of throws to be able to be a high tier passer in a Sean Payton offense. And then he brings the one thing that Drew Brees didn't really have to the table, which is elite level athleticism and a rushing threat, albeit one that needs to be tempered a little bit so that he doesn't kill himself the way he tries to run with the ball.
Yeah, I think he's a phenomenal quarterback. We've also talked about other quarterbacks, and I think the Broncos have started building a special relationship with JJ McCarthy. Do you think there's any way that he's there at 12 for the Broncos to potentially pick him up?
JJ McCarthy, I think, is a big kind of X factor in this draft. Like the narrative more than the general draft community or college football fans or whoever. Like the NFL is particularly high on JJ McCarthy. So I don't think it's entirely out of the realm of possibility that he goes as one of those first 2 or 3 quarterbacks, either at number 2 or number 3. But if he doesn't, if all of that is smoke and actually the NFL sees him kind of the way everybody else does, which is QB4 and a gap from the top 3 guys, then yeah, maybe he does slide that far. And all it would take is Minnesota saying, no, he's not the guy we want, or Minnesota making that trade up to number 3 to select Jayden Daniels or Drake May. And McCarthy, I think it's definitely possible that he could slide that far.
And speaking of the trades, I mean, we talked to Sean and George yesterday, and they said we don't know the price of what it's going to take to trade up because we don't know who is all going to try to trade up, and that will spark the demand and the price. How many teams do you think realistically trade up? Because obviously we've heard the Giants might try to make a trade from 6 up. They might also try to go back. Broncos, Vikings, maybe even the Raiders are even in this conversation.
Yeah, I mean, there's certainly no shortage of teams that theoretically could be doing it. How many are actually, going to be trying to make that happen when it comes to draft night? I think is probably a lot smaller number. Maybe we only see one of them, two of them try and make it happen. I think a big part of it is it depends on each team's individual view of these quarterbacks. And we tend to sort of view it in terms of the consensus, right? The consensus right now is Caleb Williams, number one, and then Jayden Daniels, Drake May, and maybe a gap to JJ McCarthy, but kind of a big four. NFL teams, each team is going to see that differently. There might be teams out there that think this quarterback draft is 2 names deep. And once you get beyond the second guy, forget it. Nobody else is going to be a high-end prospect. You don't want to hitch your wagon to that guy. You certainly don't want to trade 3 first-round draft picks to go get him. And a different NFL team might also see it 2 names deep, but the second name might be completely different. It might have been Drake May for the first team. It might be JJ McCarthy or Jayden Daniels for the second team. So all of these different views on that quarterback class are going to determine which teams are going to be wanting to get aggressive when the draft starts, because if the draft goes Caleb Williams number 1, whoever that second quarterback is going to kind of set the table for which teams are interested in trading up.
Feels like Michael Penix is one of the more polarizing prospects in this class. We're pretty high on him, I would say, on this show. I'm curious kind of where you stand on him.
I think there's a lot to work with. Look, he's got a great arm. He's been through adversity in a way some of these other quarterbacks haven't. He's had to go through multiple knee injuries. He's had to rebuild his career. He took a team like Washington to the national championship game. And if you go back a few months before that game happened, we were talking about him as a first-round draft pick and a guy that was going to go in the middle of the first round and maybe could even sneak his way into the top 10. And after that Texas game, and then the national title game happened. Washington got kind of annihilated by Michigan. And overnight, like over the course of 3.5 hours, he became a second-round prospect. Like he dropped a full round in the space of an evening. And then the last few months has been sort of slowly building back his draft stock and saying, actually, no, there are reasons to think that we might have had it right the first time, that he was showing enough to be a first-round pick. And, the positives outweigh the negatives. So, I know for a fact that there are NFL coaches that think he belongs in the top 3 names in this draft in terms of quarterbacks. And if it only takes one of them. So I think Penix is absolutely a live option in the first round and certainly in that kind of middle tier where, the Vikings, the Broncos, the Raiders are sitting potentially in need of a quarterback with 3 or 4 names already off the board.
We talked a lot about quarterbacks. And, if you look at all the mock drafts out there, it's probably 50% quarterback and 50% non-quarterback that is taken by the Broncos in the first round. If there was any player that was a non-quarterback that the Broncos picked, who do you think that they would choose in the first round, whether it's at 12 or trading up to get him?
Yeah, it's a good question. And it's going to be an interesting draft because I think almost all of the top 10 draft picks are going to be offensive players. Atlanta at number 8 is the sort of first team where people are suggesting they might seriously go defense. Dallas Turner is a really popular pick to them. But that means if you're picking at that spot where Denver is, if they don't trade anywhere, you might have, a really good selection of defensive players on the board because you might get the best corner available, or you might get the second best edge rusher or the best defensive tackle. Byron Murphy from Texas is a guy that a lot of people are really high on, or any of the top corners. So I think defense is where the value is going to be if they're sitting at that spot. And then it's a case of sort of which area of the defense they want to focus on. Byron Murphy, I think, would be a really interesting pick for them at that spot. He's a really disruptive, powerful, even as an undersized sort of 3-tech type of defensive lineman. He can play anywhere on the interior and just constantly cause problems for opposing offenses.
Sam, last one for you. Before you get out of here, I got to ask, what should the Broncos do with Courtland Sutton? He sat out this first week of voluntary minicamp, wanting a new contract. Is he a guy that the Broncos have to have? Or do you think there's a chance that they trade him or even cut him if it's contract or bust?
Yeah, I mean, I don't think they have to have him, but you sort of look not so much because of what he is or what he isn't, but you start to look at what the alternative is. You've already traded away Jerry Jeudy. At one point, we looked at this Denver offense and said they have one of the best wide receiver cores in the NFL. It's a perfect landing spot for any quarterback. Well, one of those guys has been traded away already and had never really become the player we expected him to. Courtland Sutton has sort of rebuilt his career after an injury and flashed some incredible catches last season. But if he's gone as well, it's Marvin Mims or it's Tim Patrick coming back off injury. It's not a good looking situation, even with the idea of adding, another rookie in the draft or whatever. So I think they want to do everything they can to keep Courtland Sutton around. But if he's pricing himself out of that, like if his demands are unreasonable, and I've no reason to think that they are, they might have to go in a different direction.
I got one last one for you just because we talked about it today. We were kind of comparing this year's quarterback class to next year's class and discussing whether it might make sense for the Broncos to go into this year with Jarrett Stidham, end up with a much higher draft pick next year, and thus not have to go for the fourth best quarterback in the class. How do you see next year's quarterback class as of now?
I don't know that it's going to be great, but I do think that there will be a couple of quarterbacks, at the top of the draft that are seen as really high-end starters. Shedeur Sanders certainly is an intriguing name. Like, I thought he had a chance to be QB2 this year if he'd come out, and if he has another good season or has a better season next year, I think he could absolutely propel himself towards being the best quarterback in that draft. Now, you'd have to clear it with Dion, right? Dion doesn't want him playing in the cold, in the snow. So we're gonna have to make sure he's okay with that if he's gonna go to Denver.
I'll send you the clip. I asked Coach Prime himself. He said he's in on the Broncos.
Perfect.
And by the way, we just became best friends. You didn't even realize it.
I was going to say, you just made Ryan's day saying Shedeur is quarterback number 1 next year. Sam, thank you so much for joining us and for all your insight.
Anytime, guys. Take it easy.